I stepped back from the iron gate, locking it with a satisfying click. It had been months of hard work, restoring this land, bringing it back to life. Every inch of it meant something to me. The quiet of the countryside, the fresh air, and the lake that I'd spent countless hours clearing and repairing. This was my sanctuary. As I stood there taking in the view, I heard the distant hum of an engine approaching. A silver sedan pulled up, kicking up dust as it came closer. The car stopped in front of the gate, and a woman in a sharp blazer stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the gravel. "Excuse me," she said with a tone that left no room for argument. "You'll need to open this gate, now." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "I'm Karen Mercer," she replied, her gaze scanning the land. "President of the Homeowners Association, and you're blocking access to this community." I frowned. "I'm not part of any HOA. She gave me a tight smile. "Oh, but you are, and you'll need to comply with our regulations. Open the gate." I stood firm. "I don't think so. This is my property. I don't owe anyone anything." Karen's smile faltered. She pulled out her phone, dialed quickly and said, "If you refuse, I'll be calling the police. We'll handle this the proper way." Her words hung in the air, and I knew then this wasn't just about a gate. This was something far bigger, and it was only just beginning. Where are you watching from around the globe? Drop a comment below and subscribe for more stories like this. My name's Mason Reed, and I had always dreamed of finding a place like this, somewhere far enough from the city to escape the noise, but close enough to feel connected to the world. When I found this piece of land, it felt like fate. A small cabin by a quiet lake surrounded by trees and open space. The moment I stepped onto the property, I knew it was where I was meant to be. It wasn't much when I first bought it. Overgrown grass, an old cabin that needed serious work, and a lake that had been neglected for years. But I could see the potential, something that others might overlook. I spent months restoring the land, working tirelessly to clear the brush, fix the cabin, and restore the lake to its former beauty. I replaced broken pipes, dug trenches for new irrigation, and rebuilt the dock from scratch. It wasn't easy, but every hour spent working on the property felt like a step closer to something better. The solitude was everything I had imagined. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sunlight glimmer on the lake, the sound of birds and wind through the trees my only company. No traffic, no honking horns, no endless demands, just peace. It was mine. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. I had no idea about the HOA's claim over the land. To me, this place was untouched by anything that felt like bureaucracy. No neighborhood meetings, no mandatory fees, and certainly no people telling me what I could and couldn't do. I had worked hard to carve out my own space, believing that I had the freedom to enjoy it as I saw fit. But then came Karen Mercer, president of the HOA, and everything I thought I knew about my new life was called into question. I hadn't expected my morning to go this way. I was enjoying my usual routine, sipping coffee and looking over the land, when I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine rumbling up the dirt road. I glanced up and saw the silver sedan again, the same one that had stopped by the gate a few days ago. My stomach tightened, knowing what was coming. The car came to a halt in front of the gate, and out stepped Karen Mercer, the woman who had made it clear she was the president of the Homeowners Association. She was dressed as if she were about to attend a board meeting, tailored blazer, high heels, and an air of authority that seemed out of place in the quiet, rural setting. She strode toward me, not bothering with pleasantries, her gaze already fixed on the gate. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound polite despite the unease building in my chest. "Can I help you with something?" "Morning," Karen said, not even sparing me a glance. She stood in front of the gate, arms crossed as if waiting for me to open it. "I need you to open this gate." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she snapped. "The HOA has rules about access to community property. This gate blocks the road that everyone else uses, and I'm not here to argue about it. Open it." My confusion turned to irritation. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you think you are. But this is my land, my gate. I'm not opening it for anyone." She didn't flinch. In fact, Karen's expression hardened, and she pulled out a binder from her car, flipping it open with an almost theatrical flourish. "You may not be aware, but when you purchased this property, you agreed to abide by HOA regulations." I glanced at the binder she was waving at me. "I didn't agree to anything. I bought this place, and I'm not aware of any HOA." "That's where you're wrong," she said, tapping the binder with a finger. "It's in the bylaws. It doesn't matter whether you knew about it or not. You're part of the community, and we have rules. As the president of the HOA, it's my job to make sure those rules are enforced." I shook my head, my frustration mounting. "I didn't sign anything that involved your HOA. This property is mine, and I don't need permission to close a gate on my own land." Karen ignored me and started reading from the binder. It clearly states that access to the property must be unobstructed, and if it is, the HOA has the right to intervene. You're in violation. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. The more she talked, the more ridiculous it sounded. There were no HOA signs when I bought this place, no community rules posted, no mention of any so-called community property. It was a simple rural area. There was no one else around for miles, and the only thing I could see blocking the gate was the damn gate itself. Karen, I'm not going to argue with you, I said, my patience thinning. This is my land, and I'm not opening it. Her smile turned colder. Then you leave me no choice. She straightened up and pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. I'll be calling the authorities. If you don't comply, I'll make sure you're fined. You'll regret this. My heart sank as I watched her dial the number. A quiet unease settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. Karen wasn't backing down. She was used to getting her way, and now she was going to use her power to try to push me into submission. I'll be calling the sheriff, Karen muttered into her phone, eyes never leaving me. They'll sort this out. I stood there, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't care about the facts about what was right. All she cared about was her authority and her ability to enforce rules that didn't even apply here. For a moment, I considered my options. Should I just give in, let her have her way, and avoid a confrontation? But then I thought about everything I had worked for. I had restored this land from the ground up, and this gate, it was mine. The land was mine. And I wasn't going to let someone like Karen, someone who didn't even understand the first thing about property rights, take that away from me. No, I said firmly, I'm not opening the gate. You can call whoever you want. She glared at me for a long moment, before finally turning away. Fine, she spat. You'll regret this. And with that she turned and stormed back to her car, leaving me standing there, still locked in my own world of uncertainty. I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming, the inevitable showdown that was about to unfold. The HOA had already made its move, and now it was up to me to fight back. After Karen left, I stood by the gate, still trying to process what had just happened. She had threatened to call the police, her smug expression as she drove off, leaving me standing there with my mind racing. I couldn't let it go. Something didn't add up. There was no HOA in this area, no notice when I bought the property, and definitely no mention of it in any paperwork. I went back to the cabin, grabbed my files, and started digging through every document I had. The deed, the contract, even the permits for the restoration work I had done. I knew I had followed every step of the legal process when I bought the property, but I needed to be sure. If Karen and her HOA President title were going to try and take my land, I needed to know what I was up against. I spread out the papers on the kitchen table and began comparing them against online county records. There was nothing. No mention of any HOA easement or land claim, nothing that supported Karen's demand for access to my property. My deed was solid, recorded with the county 2 years ago, and the land was clearly outlined, including the lot that Karen insisted was community property. I scrolled through the land registry again, no mention of an HOA, no shared land, nothing. I dialed up the county office. Hi, I'm looking for any records on easements or HOA agreements for a piece of land I just purchased. I gave the address and waited as the clerk checked their files. Sorry, sir, the clerk said after a long pause. We don't have any records of an HOA associated with that property, and no easements were filed for it. That land appears to be fully private. Are you sure it's related to an HOA? I felt a surge of relief and anger. How could Karen claim to represent an HOA that didn't even exist? I thanked the clerk and hung up, the weight of the situation beginning to settle in. I sat down at the table, going over the documents again. Every receipt for the work I'd done, every permit, every photo of the land's transformation was there, all legally filed, all in my name. The land was mine, and yet here I was, about to be dragged into a fight I hadn't asked for. I felt a deep, simmering frustration. This wasn't just about a gate, this was about something much larger. Someone trying to strip me of my rights, to take control of something that I had worked for, something that meant the world to me. I wasn't going to let it go. Over the next few days, Karen's presence loomed like a shadow. She didn't make another direct appearance, but the pressure was mounting. I found her warning email in my inbox, a formal complaint about the gate. She had also sent a copy of what she claimed was an official inspection request, asking for an inspection of my property's boundaries. I could feel the manipulation seeping through her words. You are in violation of HOA policies. Your property access is being obstructed. If you fail to comply, we will initiate further action. I immediately called the county surveyor, James Mitchell, who had handled the initial land survey for my property. I explained the situation, hoping for clarity. "Well, Mason," he said after hearing my side, "I remember your property. It was all clear when we did the survey, no issues with boundary lines or easements. If someone's claiming an easement, it's either fraudulent or just a misunderstanding. I'll come by, check out the markers, and make sure everything's good on our end. I'll call you when I'm done." A sense of relief washed over me. I knew James, and I trusted him. He was meticulous and wouldn't let anything slip through the cracks. I just needed him to confirm what I already knew, that I had every legal right to the land. A couple of days later, James came by and walked the shoreline with me, marking boundary points with his tape measure. He photographed the survey monuments, rechecked the property lines, and made some notes. "You're in the clear, Mason," he confirmed, glancing up from his notebook. "Everything checks out. Your deed is solid, and there's no encroachment. Whoever filed that inspection request doesn't have standing." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It felt like a small victory, but I knew Karen wasn't going to back down so easily. She was relentless. She wasn't just going to let go of this without a fight. And sure enough, a day later, I received another email. This time it wasn't just about the gate or an inspection. It was a formal warning from Karen, sent through the HOA's so-called legal team. She was threatening to escalate the issue with a lawsuit demanding I submit to another inspection and pay fines for obstructing community access. The threats kept coming: inspections, legal proceedings, fines, each one more desperate and controlling than the last. But the more she pressured me, the more I dug into the legalities. I had the documents, the legal backing, and now, thanks to James, the confirmation that Karen's claims were nothing more than a sham. I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to give up the land I had worked so hard to restore to some overbearing HOA president who clearly had no idea what she was doing. This fight wasn't just about a gate anymore, it was about defending my rights. With each email, each phone call, and each attempt to intimidate me, the tension escalated. But I wasn't backing down. This was my land, my life, and I wasn't about to let Karen or anyone else take that away from me. The days following my last confrontation with Karen felt like an endless series of escalating threats. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to stop. I had thought the situation might blow over, that her initial attempt to intimidate me would fizzle out, but I was wrong. She came back with a vengeance, using every weapon in her arsenal to try and force me into submission. The first move came in the form of an official legal notice. A thick envelope arrived one morning, stamped with the logo of a law firm I had never heard of. Inside was a letter demanding that I open the gate and comply with HOA rules. It cited community guidelines, which, as far as I could tell, had no legal standing whatsoever. The letter claimed I was in violation of property access laws and demanded immediate compliance or further legal action would be taken. This was no longer just an HOA issue, it was now a legal battle. I could feel the pressure mounting. The letter was followed by more, each one more demanding than the last. The fine print in these letters started to make my head spin. Fines, potential lawsuits, and worst of all, the suggestion that my ownership of the property could be contested. That was the breaking point. They were coming for my rights as a property owner, and they weren't to stop until they had their way. Karen didn't stop there. She began making phone calls to my neighbors, some of whom I had barely spoken to since moving in. At first I thought nothing of it, but the conversation started getting strange. One evening, I ran into Mr. Carson, who lived across the road. He'd always been friendly, but this time he seemed a little distant. "You're causing a lot of stir in the neighborhood, Mason," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Karen's not happy with how things are going." I blinked, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "She's been talking to people. I mean, a lot of people. Word's getting around." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "People are starting to talk about whether you're even allowed to live there the way you're going about it." I felt my blood run cold. Karen wasn't just making threats against me, she was trying to turn the community against me. She was manipulating the very people I had hoped to get along with. Her strategy was clear: divide and conquer. If she could make my neighbors see me as the outsider, as the one in the wrong, then maybe, just maybe, they'd turn on me and push me out. This was a whole new level of manipulation. I wasn't going to let that happen. I had to fight back. I called up a lawyer, hoping to get some solid advice on how to handle the HOA's threats. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel, was quick to respond. After I explained everything, she told me bluntly, "The HOA has no legal grounds to take your property or access it without your permission, but we'll need to get things in order, Mason. You're looking at a fight." Rachel told me to gather everything, every document, every email, every record of my ownership, and send it to her. I spent the next few days compiling everything I could find. The deed to the property, photos of the restoration, permits for all the work I had done. and of course all the correspondence with Karen and the HOA. As I went through the files, I couldn't help but feel a rising sense of dread. The more I gathered, the more I realized how deep the HOA's web of control and intimidation had spread. But I wasn't about to let them win. I wasn't about to give up the property I had worked so hard for. Not now, not after everything I'd put into it. As Karen continued to escalate, I found myself spending more and more time on the phone, talking to my lawyer, scheduling meetings, and going over legal documents. Each phone call with Rachel felt like I was diving deeper into a rabbit hole, one that I wasn't sure I'd be able to climb out of. Every time I thought I was making progress, Karen would find a way to up the ante. A week after I sent everything to Rachel, I received a call from the local zoning inspector, who informed me that an inspection had been scheduled for the following Monday. My heart sank. "I'm not sure why they're doing this," the inspector told me, "but I have to come by and check the property out. I'll be there at 9. I hung up, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. Karen was using every tool at her disposal to make my life miserable. She was pushing me into a corner, hoping I'd cave under the pressure. She wanted me to back down, and it was working. Every day, I felt the stress gnawing at me. I had so much riding on this. Not just the property, but my peace of mind, my sense of ownership. It felt like Karen was taking everything from me, bit by bit. Monday morning came, and the inspection didn't go as Karen had hoped. When the inspector arrived, he walked the property with me, inspecting the land and looking at the boundaries. His inspection was quick and thorough, and he seemed unfazed by Karen's earlier claims. "Everything looks fine," he said as we walked along the perimeter. "There's no issue with the gate, the land is well maintained, and you're well within your rights to keep it closed. It's a straightforward situation. If they try to claim otherwise, they're going to have a tough time." I nodded, feeling some relief but also a deepening anger. Karen wasn't going to give up. I could see it in her eyes, every time we crossed paths. This was no longer just about property, it was about power. She wanted to control me, control the land, control the narrative. The situation was reaching a boiling point. Each day, Karen escalated the pressure, legal threats, inspections, manipulation. It was starting to feel like a war, and I was beginning to realize that if I didn't fight back with everything I had, I was going to lose everything I'd worked so hard for. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The days following the inspection were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. There was a nagging voice in my head telling me that Karen's claims, her repeated demands, and the increasing pressure couldn't just be brushed off as petty HOA overreach. She had to be hiding something bigger. I spent hours in the cabin that weekend, going through every document I had over and over, the deed, the permits, the inspection reports, everything. There had to be something I was overlooking, some key piece of information that would connect all the dots. On Sunday evening, after what felt like an endless review of documents, I came across an old, yellowed file buried at the bottom of my box of records. It was a folder I hadn't looked at in a while, paperwork from the original owner of the property. I had never thought much of it before, but now, something about it felt important. I opened it and started sifting through the pages. Most of it was standard: title history, water rights, records of minor repairs, but then I saw a series of letters between the previous owner and an entity I hadn't seen before, the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. I froze. Pine Ridge? That was the neighborhood I had moved into, but I never saw any paperwork from them when I bought the property. No one had mentioned it. I pulled the letters from the file and began to read. They were dated years before I moved in, back when the previous owner was still in charge. The first one, dated just after the purchase of the property, was from Karen Mercer herself, signed as the president of the HOA. The letter was politely worded, but the message was clear. The HOA had laid claim to the access road leading to the lake, and had imposed certain community guidelines that required the owner to submit to HOA control in exchange for shared land rights. The letter mentioned something about future plans for the area, plans that never came to fruition. I quickly flipped through the rest of the file, each letter more ominous than the last. The previous owner had never responded, leaving everything unresolved. It seemed like they just dropped out of the HOA entirely. But why? And why hadn't I been told about any of this when I bought the property? I felt a surge of frustration and anger build inside me. The HOA didn't just want access to my land, they had tried to take control of it long before I'd even come into the picture. They had overstepped their bounds in the past, and now it seemed like Karen was trying to finish what they had started. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. I spent the next few days piecing together the puzzle, trying to connect the dots. With the help of the county records, I discovered that the so-called community easement Karen had referred to didn't exist. There was no legal filing for any such easement, nor any mention of shared property rights in the county's records. What Karen had been trying to do was simple: claim ownership where there was none. And it seemed that this wasn't the first time she had tried it. I reached out to my lawyer, Rachel, and told her about the new findings. She immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Karen is trying to establish a claim through intimidation, but it's all smoke and mirrors, Rachel said over the phone. The lack of any official records, no filed easement, no legal action proves she's acting outside the law. If she's misrepresenting the facts to you and the community, that's a major problem. I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. It was clear now that Karen had no legal basis for her claims, but what really stunned me was the realization that she might be trying to manipulate the entire neighborhood in order to seize control of the land. My land. But there was more. The breakthrough came when I discovered a series of transaction records from the HOA's financial history, which Rachel had helped me get access to. After some digging, I found a payment record for a surveying company hired by the HOA to assess the boundaries of properties in the area, including mine. The timing was curious, just months before I had bought the land, when the previous owner had been fighting with the HOA. I requested the full report from the surveying company, and when it arrived I couldn't believe what I was reading. According to the report, the HOA had hired the company to conduct a survey that redefined property lines, placing the boundary between my property and the HOA's common area on land that wasn't even theirs. The surveyors had altered the boundary line by several feet, making it appear as though the HOA controlled part of my land. But the most shocking part was that the surveyors had failed to file the updated documents with the county, making the adjustments entirely invalid. Karen's fingerprints were all over this. She had been involved in an illegal scheme to falsify property lines and had used her position as HOA President to manipulate the land survey. She was trying to cover up her actions by pressuring me into compliance, and using her authority to force the community to accept her lie. But this was no mistake. She had actively tried to undermine the legal ownership of my property. Armed with this new evidence, I felt a surge of power. I wasn't just a homeowner trying to fight off a bully anymore. I was up against a person who had abused her position of authority, and I had the proof to back it up. Karen thought she could scare me into submission, but now I had the upper hand. I wasn't going to wait for her next move. I had everything I needed to expose her actions: documents, financial records, even the altered survey report. I was going to confront her head on and take the fight to the HOA. This wasn't just about a gate or an easement anymore. It was about defending my home, my rights, and my peace. And I wasn't backing down. The community meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m., and I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to avoid the confrontation altogether. But as the day wore on, I knew I couldn't back down. If I let Karen and the HOA control this situation without standing up for myself, they'd walk all over me. And worse, they'd think they could do it again with anyone else who dared challenge them. I arrived early, walking into the local community center with a knot in my stomach. The room was buzzing with conversation, mostly older residents who, by the looks of it, had been attending these meetings for years. As I entered, I felt like a stranger in a place I was supposed to call home. The tight-knit community had been friendly enough, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that they might turn on me the moment Karen made her case. I spotted Karen at the front of the room, standing near a small podium, flipping through a stack of papers with a smug look on her face. She hadn't seen me yet, but it was only a matter of time. I took a seat in the back, not wanting to draw attention just yet, but trying to gather my thoughts. I had everything I needed: documents, proof, and an unwavering determination. But I knew this wouldn't be easy. I had to keep calm and focused. I couldn't let Karen's manipulations get under my skin. As the meeting began, Karen took the floor. She smiled at the crowd, exuding an air of superiority that made my skin crawl. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying through the room with practiced confidence. "I'm here tonight to address an ongoing issue regarding the land that has recently been purchased by our neighbor, Mr. Mason Reed. As you know, we, the HOA, are responsible for maintaining the common areas and ensuring that property rights and access are properly respected." She paused for dramatic effect, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Unfortunately, Reed has obstructed access to one of those common areas by closing off the gate to his property, which directly impacts the flow of traffic in this neighborhood." A murmur rippled through the room, and I could feel my heart rate pick up. She was twisting the truth already, making it sound like I was some kind of outlaw who had maliciously blocked off community access. But I wasn't going to let her spin her narrative without a fight. Karen continued, laying out her case with a series of half-truths and exaggerated claims. She produced a few papers, copies of the fraudulent inspection request she had sent, and spoke about how my actions were in violation of HOA regulations. She claimed that the community's property rights had been threatened by my gate. It was infuriating. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, and every second she spoke felt like a personal attack. But I wasn't going to sit back and let her lie. As soon as she finished, I stood up, causing a brief hush to fall over the crowd. I knew my heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady as I addressed the room. "Thank you for your time," I began, my voice cutting through the silence. "I'm sure many of you have heard Karen's version of events by now. But I'm here to tell you that what she's saying is far from the truth. The land I purchased, which I've worked tirelessly to restore, is my land. And I have every legal right to control the access to it, including the gate." Karen's expression hardened, but I didn't back down. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth behind me. "I've been digging through the records, and I've found something you all should know," I continued, pulling out the documents I had gathered over the past week. I spread them across the podium, making sure everyone could see the official county records, the lack of any easement, and the false claims Karen had made about the property's boundaries. "The deed to this property is clean. There are no easements, no shared access, and no HOA claims over my land. In fact, it turns out that the so-called inspection request Karen submitted was based on fraudulent documents, and her efforts to manipulate the boundaries of this property are not just illegal, they're dishonest," I said, my voice growing more firm. "Karen Mercer, as the president of this HOA, has overstepped her authority, and now she's trying to force all of you to believe her lies." I could feel the room shift. People were whispering among themselves, glancing nervously at each other. Karen's face flushed, her lips tight with anger as she tried to regain control of the situation. "This is completely absurd," Karen spat, stepping forward, her eyes wide with fury. "He's just trying to deflect. Don't listen to him. We've worked hard to maintain this community, and he's clearly trying to tear it apart. These documents don't prove anything." But I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let her distract the crowd with her anger. I turned to the room, speaking directly to the neighbors who had been quietly watching the spectacle unfold. "You all know me," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I'm not here to stir up trouble. I'm here because I've invested in this land, my home, and I want to live peacefully. But Karen and the HOA have used fear and manipulation to try to take what's mine. This isn't just about a gate, it's about standing up for what's right." The room grew quieter as I continued. "If Karen and the HOA are willing to go this far to bend the truth, what's next? Will they try to take more from us? Will they push us all into submission? This is the kind of overreach we should be standing against." There was a pause, and then I saw it. A few neighbors began to speak in hushed voices, exchanging glances. One or two nodded in agreement, and I could tell the tide was turning. They were starting to see the truth, starting to realize that Karen's power trip wasn't about the community at all. It was about control. Karen saw it too. Her facade cracked for just a moment as she glared at the crowd. But instead of backing down, she stood taller, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. This isn't over, Mason," she growled, her voice trembling with rage. "You can't just walk in here and disrupt everything we've worked for." I looked at her, unshaken. "No, Karen, you're the one who's been disrupting everything." The room was split. There were still a few who seemed unsure, who clung to Karen's authority, but I could see the cracks in her control. More and more people were starting to question her version of events, realizing that the power she wielded was based on lies and manipulation. The courtroom was stuffy, filled with tension that hung thick in the air as the judge entered and took their seat. I felt the weight of the moment pressing on me. This was the culmination of everything. The battle for my land, for my home, for the peace I had worked so hard to build. Karen sat across from me, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes narrowed with venom. She had an air of confidence about her, as if she thought she had already won, but I knew better. The tide had shifted, and today I was taking my stand. The judge called the session to order, his gavel striking the wood with a sharp crack. "Let's get started," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Reed, I understand you're contesting the claims made by Ms. Mercer and the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. You may begin." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The room felt small, and I was keenly aware of the eyes on me. Karen's lawyer, the judge, the court reporter, and even the few neighbors who had come to witness the hearing. My legal team, including Rachel, stood by my side, ready to back me up with evidence. "Thank you, Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves swirling in my stomach. "I'm here today to prove that the claims made against me by Miss Karen Mercer and the Pine Ridge HOA are not only false but are based on deliberate manipulation and misrepresentation of the facts." I glanced at Karen, whose smug expression didn't falter, and then turned back to the judge. This land was purchased legally. The deed was recorded with the county, and the boundaries have been verified by an independent surveyor. There is no easement, no shared access, and no legal claim by the HOA over my property. I pulled out the stack of documents I had prepared: property records, the fraudulent inspection request from Karen, the altered survey, and the damning HOA communications. These documents show that Karen and the HOA have been using false claims of ownership and control to manipulate the community and exert authority they don't have. Rachel nodded, and the judge signaled for me to continue. I began to lay out my case piece by piece, presenting each document and piece of evidence. The first thing I showed was the official deed to the property, the one that clearly outlined the boundaries and proved that the land was solely mine. The judge looked it over, then nodded. "This is solid," he said, looking up at Karen, who was now shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Next, I presented the survey report from the county and James Mitchell, the local surveyor, who had verified the property lines. The map showed the original boundaries, uncontested and legally filed. I could feel Karen's eyes on me, but I kept my focus on the judge. "And now," I said, "I have the fraudulent documents submitted by Ms. Mercer and the HOA. I handed over the altered survey, the one that showed the manipulated property lines, and the inspection request with the forged signatures." The judge examined them closely, his brow furrowed in confusion. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. "This survey doesn't match the official records. And these signatures," he paused, looking at Karen. "Ms. Mercer, these appear to be forged." Karen's face flushed crimson. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice shaking with the first sign of real emotion. The judge ignored her and turned to me. "What's your next piece of evidence, Mr. Reed?" I motioned to the witness stand where James Mitchell, the county surveyor, was waiting to testify. He stood up confidently and walked to the stand, swearing his oath before the court. "I've been a licensed surveyor for over 20 years, James began, his voice steady. "I personally conducted the survey on Mr. Reed's property. The lines are clear. There's no ambiguity, and when I reviewed the documents presented by Mercer and the HOA, I can confirm that the survey they referenced was altered. It does not reflect the true boundaries of the property." The judge nodded, turning to Karen's lawyer. "Ms. Mercer, do you have a response to this?" Karen's lawyer, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Your Honor, we maintain that the HOA has rights over access to Mr. Reed's property. The community has used the road for years, and this dispute is about proper management, not ownership." But I wasn't going to let her distract from the truth. I stood up and addressed the judge directly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this isn't about a road. It's about an unlawful attempt to take control of land that doesn't belong to them. They've manipulated documents, lied about property lines, and tried to use the HOA as a tool to force their will upon me. This is about authority being abused, and I won't stand for it." I could see the tide turning in the courtroom. Some of the neighbors in the back, who had been sitting quietly, were starting to whisper to each other, and I noticed a few heads nodding in agreement. I had their attention. The truth was coming out, and Karen's lies were starting to unravel. The next witness was Mrs. Henderson, a longtime neighbor who had lived in Pine Ridge for over 20 years. She had witnessed Karen's rise to power in the HOA and was well aware of the way she manipulated the rules for personal gain. "I've known Karen Mercer for years," Mrs. Henderson began. "She's always been about control. The HOA isn't about community, it's about her getting what she wants. She's made threats before, trying to push people around, using the HOA as her weapon." Karen shot up from her seat. "This is ridiculous. Mrs. Henderson has no right to speak. She's biased." But the judge overruled her. "Let the witness speak, Miss Mercer." Mrs. Henderson continued, detailing how Karen had tried to manipulate other neighbors, including the previous property owner, into signing away rights to their land. "Karen doesn't care about the community, she cares about the power she has over it," Mrs. Henderson concluded. The moment of truth came when I presented the final piece of evidence: the email trail that linked Karen to the fraudulent actions. The email showed how she had coordinated with the surveyors, even offering to pay them under the table to alter the property lines in her favor. These emails were time-stamped and irrefutable. The judge glanced at Karen, his expression cold. "Ms. Mercer, these emails are damning. They show clear intent to manipulate the property boundaries and mislead the court." Karen's face twisted in anger, but there was no denying it. She was trapped. Her lies had been exposed. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking, "but—" "Enough," the judge interrupted. "I've heard enough. This case is clear." The judge spent a few moments reviewing the evidence before looking up at us. Based on the evidence presented, I find in favor of Mr. Reed. The HOA's claims are without merit, and Ms. Mercer's actions are in direct violation of property law. This case is dismissed. It was over. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to exhale. I had won. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was broken, and her deceit had been exposed. I looked around the room, and for the first time I saw a change in the way the neighbors looked at me. Not as an outsider, but as someone who had fought for what was right. Karen stood up, her face pale and her jaw clenched in fury, but she had nothing left. The judge banged his gavel. The case is closed. The days following the hearing were filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. For so long I had lived under the constant weight of uncertainty, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But now, with the court's ruling in my favor, I could finally breathe again. The land I had fought so hard to restore was mine, undisputed and legally protected. And for the first time in weeks, the tension that had plagued my every waking moment began to dissolve. Karen's grip on the neighborhood had shattered, and the aftermath was swift. The HOA, which had once been a shadowy force of control in the community, now stood exposed for the corrupt organization it had become under her leadership. Her removal as HOA president was immediate, as was the cessation of the bogus rules she had tried to impose. But it wasn't just the legal victory that had changed things, it was the shift in the air around Pine Ridge. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood was starting to fade, replaced by a sense of normalcy, of peace. I had always considered myself a quiet person, someone who valued solitude and the comfort of my own space. I had never sought out conflict, and I certainly never imagined I would have to stand up against something as intimidating as a homeowners association. But here I was, a small victory under my belt, and a story to tell. It wasn't just about the land anymore, it was about what that land represented: freedom, fairness, and standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. The morning after the ruling, I sat on the porch of my cabin, staring out over the lake. The water was calm, the birds chirped softly in the distance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. The silence wasn't uncomfortable or oppressive, it was soothing. My land was safe, my rights were restored, and the fight I had put up was behind me. But there was one thing I still needed to do. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in weeks. Mrs. Henderson. "Hello?" she answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "It's Mason," I said. "I just wanted to thank you for everything." There was a brief pause before she responded. "You don't need to thank me. You fought for what was right, and I was just doing my part. I'm glad to see you won." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said sincerely. "Your testimony, the way you helped expose Karen's tactics, it meant everything." "I think you would have done just fine on your own," she chuckled. "But I'm glad it helped. It's been a long time since we've had someone stand up to her. I think this victory has more meaning than just your property rights, Mason. It's a victory for the whole community." Her words stuck with me. The victory wasn't just about me, it was about the truth coming to light and restoring fairness to a community that had been living under Karen's manipulative rule for far too long. The sense of empowerment I had felt during the court hearing wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone who had suffered under her control. "I think you're right," I replied, my voice quieter now. "It's about more than just my property. It's about fairness, about showing people that they can stand up to bullies, no matter how powerful they think they are." "Well, you've certainly done that," Mrs. Henderson said. "And I know I'm not the only one who's grateful for what you've done. There are others in the neighborhood who feel the same way." I smiled. It was still hard to believe, but I knew she was right. Despite Karen's attempts to manipulate and divide the community, her influence had begun to unravel. People had started talking, started asking questions, and many of them were beginning to see the truth for themselves. A few days later, the HOA members held a new meeting to elect a new president and address the issues that had been lingering for months. I wasn't sure what to expect, whether the same old faces would stand up and try to continue Karen's legacy, or whether things had truly changed. I was invited to the meeting, though I didn't know if I would speak or not. As I entered the community center, I was surprised to see several familiar faces from around the neighborhood. Neighbors who had kept their distance during the height of the conflict were now showing their support. The room was quieter, less tense, as though the air had been cleared. Mrs. Henderson stood up at the front, a soft smile on her face. "I think we all know why we're here today," she said, her voice calm but steady. "It's time for a change. It's time to rebuild what we've lost and move forward as a community." The meeting went smoothly. Much to my surprise, no one tried to defend Karen's actions, and a new leader was elected. someone who promised transparency and fairness. By the end of the meeting, the HOA was taking steps to implement reforms, including regular audits and community meetings where everyone would have a voice. It was a small step, but it was a step toward a more balanced, just community. As the weeks passed, things began to return to normal. The tension that had once gripped the neighborhood melted away, replaced by a newfound sense of trust. People began to stop by the cabin more often, offering greetings and asking how I was doing. It felt good to be part of the community again, truly part of it, not just an outsider or someone caught in a power struggle. Karen, on the other hand, faded into the background. She kept a low profile, no longer exerting the same influence over the neighborhood. I didn't know what happened to her after the hearing, but I knew one thing: she had lost. Her lies had been exposed, her control had crumbled, and she was no longer a threat. I sat on my porch one evening, the sun setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The sounds of nature surrounded me, the gentle rustling of leaves, the occasional splash of water as a fish leapt from the lake. I had worked so hard to restore this land, and now I could finally relax, knowing that it was mine to keep. I had learned a lot during the past few months. The fight wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it had been worth it. I had fought for what was right, not just for myself, but for the community I had come to care about. And in the end, justice had prevailed. The neighborhood had changed, and I had changed too. I wasn't just a landowner anymore. I was someone who had stood up, someone who had refused to back down, someone who had helped restore balance to a community that had been shaken by fear and manipulation. I took a deep breath, savoring the peace that surrounded me. The battle was over, and the future was bright. As I sit here, looking out over the lake that I fought so hard to protect, it's hard to believe just how far I've come. What started as a simple desire for peace and privacy turned into a battle that tested everything I thought I knew about ownership, rights, and community. But in the end, it was a fight worth having. When I first moved here, I thought this land would be my sanctuary, a place to get away from the noise, to breathe and to build something of my own. I never expected to be thrust into a fight with the very people I had hoped to live peacefully alongside. At the time, I had no idea how far someone would go to control what wasn't theirs, to manipulate a system and twist the truth. But I also had no idea just how strong I could be when I stood my ground. Throughout this journey, I learned that standing up for your rights isn't just about winning, it's about holding on to your integrity, refusing to back down in the face of injustice, and knowing that truth will always win in the end. It's about protecting what matters, whether it's your home, your livelihood, or the values that shape who you are. The fight wasn't easy, but I've learned that sometimes you have to fight to reclaim what's rightfully yours. It wasn't just about proving I owned the land. It was about showing myself and everyone else that we have the power to challenge systems of control when they've gone too far. And no matter how hard the battle gets, standing firm and speaking the truth can change everything. I've gained more than just my property back. I've gained a deeper understanding of my own strength, and I've learned that while you can't control everything around you, you can control how you respond to it. This fight has shaped me in ways I never imagined, and it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a property rights dispute? Have you ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours in the face of authority or an oppressive system? I know I'm not alone in this, whether it's an HOA nightmare, a legal battle over land ownership, or standing up to those who think they have the right to control your life. We all have stories to share. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Share your story, whether it's a small victory or a tough fight you're still going through. Let's keep the conversation going. Your story might just be the encouragement someone else needs to keep fighting. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video. I'll be sharing more stories of justice, triumph, and standing up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.